It was a Wednesday, 1946. Early morning, the light still soft. I was at the well when I heard the truck. I don't know why I walked toward it. You don't think. You just move. It stopped at the Belchev gate. Dejan came out still tucking in his shirt. Behind him, his mother, his father, his brother Stefan. They stood there, watching. Two men got out. They didn't speak. They didn't handcuff him. They just pointed. Dejan turned once, looked back at the house. Not at his family, at the house. Then he got in. That same afternoon, they came for me. Two militiamen, polite they said. Just some questions. 3 weeks. A metal cot. One barred window. Then they let me go. No explanation. Nothing. Dejan wasn't so lucky. They sent him to the island on the Danube. He was 20 years old. His crime? He had helped people write down that they were Bulgarian. But this wasn't not all of it. I remember the valley before the silence. The way the morning light would settle over the tobacco fields, turning the dew to silver. The smell was wood smoke and wet limestone, and the river, the Struma, was a slow brown ribbon at the foot of everything. Our village, Koshu, clung to the slope like it was holding on, and every hour, without fail, the church bell. It wasn't just a sound, it was the heartbeat of the place. You set your life by it. My mother kept a secret in the flower tin. A photograph of Tsar Boris III tucked beneath the sack. She'd take it out sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, wipe the flower from his face with her apron. It was already dangerous. But for her, it wasn't politics. It was the world she knew, folded neatly away. My father was a school teacher. He taught me that the valley had been Bulgarian since before anyone alive could remember. That the people who plowed it, who were buried in it, who prayed in its churches, were Bulgarians. He said this not as an argument, but as a fact, like the color of the soil. It was simply the truth of the ground beneath your feet. And then there was Dejan Belchev. 20 years old in 1946. He had the large, careful hands of someone who worked a tobacco plot and kept goats. He would quote the poet Botev when he was trying to say something serious, his voice going quiet and formal. He was courting me. Not with grand gestures, but with a kind of deliberate attention. He would walk me home from the village well, carrying the bucket, his steps measured. He intended to do things properly. I knew that. Everyone did. It was a life you could see, laid out like a path. The war had ended. We thought the difficult part was over. We were wrong, of course. The new flags appeared first. Red ones on the municipality building. They looked strange against the whitewashed wall. Then came the meetings. Men who had never led anything, who had maybe driven a truck or worked a lathe, suddenly standing at the front of the room. They used new words. The people, history, necessity. They told us what history required of us. And a quietness came over the village. Not peace, a kind of waiting. a fear that settled over the valley like a change in the weather. You could smell it in the air, sharper than wood smoke. It was the smell of things turning. My father stopped talking about the ground beneath our feet at the dinner table. He just ate his soup, his eyes on the bowl. My mother stopped taking the photograph out of the tin. The bell still rang, but it sounded different, as if it were ringing from farther away. Diane and I would walk, and we wouldn't talk about the meetings or the flags. We talked about the river, the crop, the way the light hit the mountains in the evening. As if by not naming the new silence, we could keep it outside of us. We were holding our breath, I think, all of us. The entire valley holding its breath. That was the world. That was the valley before. Solid and familiar and already beginning to dissolve at the edges. I didn't know it then, but I was learning the first lesson, that the past isn't something you leave behind. It's something you carry. And sometimes someone comes along and tries to tell you you're carrying it wrong, that you have the wrong name for it. It came in the spring of 1946, a piece of paper from Sofia sent to every village council in our valley. I didn't see the original, not then, but I remember the weight of it. It wasn't a request, it was a correction. They said we had been mistaken about ourselves, that the language we spoke at home, the songs my grandmother sang, the saints we prayed to in our church, they were not Bulgarian as we had always thought. They were Macedonian. It was presented as a discovery, a historical truth finally acknowledged. But in the village, we heard it differently. It felt like being told the sky was not blue, but a different shade of blue you had to learn a new word for. And if you refused to learn the word, you were denying the sky itself. The confusion didn't last long. It curdled into something colder, a slow understanding. This wasn't about a box on a form. It was about agreeing that our parents were wrong, that our dead were wrong, that the ground under our feet had a different name now, and we had to consent to the forgetting. I was at the Belchev house the evening Dejan's father read it aloud. He had gotten a copy from the council. His voice was flat, just the words on the page. The kerosene lamp made shadows jump on the walls. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then Dejan said it, quietly, to the table. I will not sign my name to a lie. That's all. His mother stood up so suddenly, her chair scraped. She went to the small window over the sink and put her back to us. She didn't cry. She just stood there, looking out at a darkness that was no longer just the night, and nobody knew what to say next. That's how the petition began, not with a shout, but with that silence. It was a frightened thing, a modest thing. The men, my father, Dejan's father, others from nearby villages, they decided the answer to being told you are not what you are is to write down that you are. To state the plain fact, to say we are Bulgarians. They would collect the names, just the names, and give the paper to the municipality. Let the record show. It felt like the correct, the orderly thing to do. A piece of paper against a piece of paper. I remember watching them leave our yard one morning. A group of them walking together down the road toward Petrich. They moved slowly, not like men going to a protest, but like men going to a funeral. There was a formality to it, a dignity, I thought. They believed in the power of a statement. They believed truth was a kind of shield. We were so young. We didn't understand that the new state had no use for our truth, that our correct, orderly piece of paper would be seen as a rebellion, that names on a list were not a record to be kept, but a list to be used. I remember the quiet when they returned, the way my father put his hat on the hook and didn't turn around. He just said, "It is done." And for a few days there was a strange light feeling. We had done the right thing. We had spoken. The waiting began then, though we didn't call it waiting yet. We just called it Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The ordinary days, the sun rose over the tobacco fields. The church bell still rang, but the air had changed. It was thinner, as if we were all holding our breath without knowing why. It was a Wednesday. I remember that precisely. A Wednesday in late spring. The light was already warm by 7 o'clock. I was at the well behind our house, the bucket heavy in my hands, the smell of wet stone and damp earth rising from the ground. And then I heard the truck. It was a Soviet GAZ, the kind they use for everything. 2 militia men in the cab, 2 more standing in the bed, holding on to the roof. They were moving through the village at a speed that was just wrong, not fast, not slow, but purposeful. It made the dogs bark. A specific, frantic sound. I put the bucket down. I didn't think. I just walked to the lane. The truck stopped at the Belchev gate. I was maybe 50 meters away, hidden by the corner of our shed. Dejan came out of the house. He was still tucking in his shirt, as if he had been expecting them but had hoped to have time for breakfast. His mother came out right behind him, her hands fluttering at her apron. She followed him to the gate. His younger brother, Stefan, came out then and held her back, his arms around her shoulders from behind. Dejan turned once. He looked back at the house, not at his mother, at the house. Then they put him in the back of the truck. They didn't handcuff him, they just pointed. He climbed in, and they drove away. The dogs kept barking for a long time. They came for me that same afternoon, 2 local militia men. They were polite. They said I should come to Petrich to answer some questions. My father stood in the doorway, his face gray. He said nothing. I was held for 3 weeks in a room in the militia building. It had a metal cot, a single barred window. You could see a square of sky if you stood on the stool. That's all. They interrogated me twice, a man in a brown suit. He never used my name. He called me the girl. He wanted to know who else had known about the petition. What names had been mentioned? Was my father involved? He had a pad of paper, but he never wrote anything down while I was looking. I told them about Dejan. I told them I knew he had written something. That was all. I did not tell them my father had known. I did not tell them my two uncles had discussed signing it. I did not tell them I had carried a message from Dejan to Georgie the blacksmith, a scrap of paper about a meeting place. I was 16. I told myself I was protecting them. I have spent 69 years deciding whether that is true. Whether it was courage or whether it was simply that I was too frightened to think of more names to give them. The fear had a taste, like metal, like the tin cup they gave me water in. You hold it in your mouth and you make your choices. They let me go after 3 weeks. No explanation, just a dismissal. When I walked back into our house, my mother was at the stove. She didn't turn around. She just said, "Don't ask about him." Not yet. And so began the waiting. Not the quiet kind, the active, listening kind, where every sound in the lane could be a truck or could be nothing, where you learn that silence is the loudest thing of all. That here was a long, flat road. I would stand at the edge of the tobacco field at dusk, looking north. It was a habit. I told myself I was just getting air, but everyone knew. In a village that small, waiting is a public performance. His place at the cooperative was filled by the end of the month. Life closed over the space he left, smooth and fast like water. His mother aged a decade that summer. Her hair went gray in patches like frost on a window. We never spoke of him directly. We spoke around him. "The weather is hard on the crops," she'd say, and I'd know she meant the silence was hard on her. "The apples are sour this year," I'd answer, and she'd know I meant my heart was sour. Waiting is not doing nothing. It is a kind of work. You wake up and you have to lift the weight of the day, the weight of not knowing. What we knew about where he was came in pieces, like shards of a broken cup you could never glue back together. People called it the island, or up north, a labor camp on the Danube. Details surfaced in kitchens after dark from men who had returned. They spoke in low voices, always starting with, "I shouldn't say this." The stories had no faces, no names. They were just shadows, and Dejan was somewhere inside that shadow. Then, in autumn, the letter came, 4 months gone. A man I didn't know handed it to my father in the market. "Smuggled out by a guard," he said, and then he was gone. It was written on the inside of a cigarette packet, the paper thin as skin. 9 lines in tiny, cramped pencil. He was alive. He was working. He thought of our valley at sunrise. And he said I should not wait for him if waiting was too hard. I held that paper for an hour. I memorized the shape of every letter. My father came in from the yard, saw my face, saw the wrapper on the table. He didn't ask. He just said, "You have to burn it, Yana, tonight." He was right. The DS still had eyes in the village. A letter from Belene was a crime. Evidence of contact with an enemy of the people. So I opened the stove. I held a corner of that thin paper to the flame. It blackened, curled, vanished into ash. I have regretted it every single day since. Not because it was dangerous to keep. I regret it because it was the only time in all that year that I heard his voice, and I burned it myself. The winter that followed was the quietest I have ever known. The waiting changed after the letter. It became heavier, more solid. Because now I had a specific thing to wait for, not just his return, but the chance to tell him, to answer what he had written, to say that waiting was hard, yes, but stopping was impossible. The road out of the village stayed empty, and I kept standing at the edge of the field, looking north into the flat, cold light, wondering if the sun that rose over the river there felt anything like the sun that rose here over the tobacco. It was a morning in early summer, 1947. I was hanging washing in the yard. The air was already warm, and the wet linen smelled of the well water. I heard the gate latch click, and then his voice. He said my name, just once. I had rehearsed that moment 1,000 times, what I would say, how I would look, and when it came, I couldn't move. I just stood there with a wet shirt in my hands and stared at him like he was something I wasn't sure was real. He was a man who had lost perhaps 15 kilograms. His clothes hung on him. But it wasn't just the thinness. It was the stillness. A stillness that had not been there before. Not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of someone who has learned to take up less space in the world, to make less noise, to want less, because wanting had been systematically removed. I saw his hands when he reached for the gatepost. They were damaged. The skin was cracked and thickened, the knuckles swollen. Hands that had been holding a shovel or a pick in all weathers. In the weeks after, he told me some things. He told me about the forced labor on the dikes along the Danube, the mud that never left your boots, the cold in winter that got into your bones and stayed there. He told me about the men who did not come back, and he told me about the guards. The particular cruelty of the guards who were themselves young and frightened and expressed their fear as violence. But there were things he never told me. I understood them from the way he sometimes stopped mid-sentence and looked at the floor. From the way he would wake in the night and lie perfectly still, not breathing, listening for a sound that wasn't there. The island had taken the boy who quoted poetry and given me back this careful, quiet man. I loved him more and differently, and it broke my heart. We were married in October of that same year, a small ceremony. No party official was invited. The village priest performed the rite in a church that was already being pressured to close. My mother cried, his mother cried. And Dayan stood very straight, saying the words with the careful precision of a man who has decided that this, at least, he will do correctly. It was an act of defiance, that wedding, a quiet one. To stand in that church, to say those old words, while everything around us was being renamed and reorganized. We were building a small room of our own with a lock on the inside. For a little while, it felt like enough. We had survived. We had each other. The valley was still there. We tried to believe the worst was over. But you must understand, the petition was still unsigned. His name, my name, they were still listed incorrectly in the district ledger. It was a debt we had not paid. And in that system, debts were never forgotten, only collected at the time of their choosing. We would lie in the dark and I could feel him thinking about it. The space he took up in the world was small, but it was his. And they still wanted to put a different name on it. The stillness he brought back from the island, it wasn't peace. It was a kind of waiting, a deeper, more patient waiting than mine had been. He was waiting to see what they would do next. And I began to wait too. Not for him to come home, but for the other shoe to drop. For the knock on the door that would prove our little room had no lock after all. The peace we had was borrowed. And we both knew the payment would come due. They came in the evening. The knock was polite, but it was the kind of polite that expects to be let in. The local party secretary, a man from Sofia who had never seen the Struma River before, they gave him his posting, and two younger men in suits that were too heavy for the season. They brought the form with them. He sat at our table, right there where we ate our bread. He smoothed the paper flat with the palm of his hand. He explained it to us in the patient tone of a man explaining arithmetic to a slow child. He said the Macedonian people had a proud revolutionary history. He said we were part of that history. That signing was a formality, a bureaucratic matter, nothing more. He smiled when he said nothing more. I remember the way his teeth looked in the lamplight. Dejan said nothing. He just looked at the form. He had that stillness he brought back from the island, a kind of closing down. The secretary waited. The two younger men watched the wall behind us. Finally, Dejan said he would need to think about it. The secretary's smile didn't change. Of course, he said. Take your time, there is no rush. And we all knew there was a rush. There was always a rush. The rush was the whole point of the visit. That night, in our bed, I told him to sign it. I am not ashamed to say this now. I told him a piece of paper does not change what you are. I told him we had a child coming. I told him Belene was still there. The island was still in the Danube. I said all the practical, fearful things a woman says when she is trying to keep a roof over a life that is just beginning. He lay beside me, his hands at his sides, staring at the ceiling. He didn't answer for a long time. The moonlight came through our small window and cut a pale line across the floor. Then he said, "If I sign it, what do I tell our children they are?" He didn't look at me. He said it to the dark. And I had no answer for that, because it wasn't a question about politics. It was a question about a kitchen table 20 years in the future and a child asking where they come from. What do you say? We did not sign. I say that now, in 2015, and what I feel is not pride. It is not regret either. It is something more complicated, a heavy knot. Because I know that not signing that paper is what led to everything that came next. The knock that was not polite. The official document that did not offer time to think. The truck that was waiting. And I also know, in my bones, that signing would have led to something else. Something quieter, perhaps. Something safer on the surface. But I can feel the shape of it even now. A different kind of silence. A man who comes home from work and does not meet his own eyes in the mirror. A story you begin to tell your children and then stop. A life of small daily surrenders that add up to a single large one. We chose the other price. The form stayed on the table for 2 days. Then Dayan put it away in a drawer. We didn't speak of it again, we just waited. You learn to wait for the consequence. It has its own sound, its own smell. You wake up and you listen for it. The envelope was the same as any other. That was the first thing I noticed. The paper was cheap, the stamp was ordinary. It didn't look like an ending. It said our presence in the Petrich region was incompatible with the social order. We had 14 days to report for relocation to a village called Selce, 800 kilometers north. A place we had never heard of, on a map we did not own. Dayan just folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He said, "I will go and ask." He meant the municipality. He came back 2 hours later, his face empty. There was no appeal. The decision was final. The 14 days were a kind of slow drowning. How do you fit a life into what a truck can carry? My mother came over and sat on the floor with me. We spread everything out, linens, my wedding dress, Dayan's books, our daughter's christening gown. She would pick something up, hold it, and then put it in the leave pile. She wept the whole time, but silently. Just tears running down her face without a single sound. Our little girl, Yana, she was just over a year old. She felt the fear in the room. She clung to my neck and wouldn't let go. The morning we left, the air was cool and sweet with spring. It felt like a betrayal. We were not the only ones. The truck held 4 other families from the valley. We knew them. We didn't speak. We just arranged ourselves among the bundles and sacks, and the engine started. For most of the 8 hours, nobody said a word. We just watched the land change. The mountains around our valley softened, then fell away behind us. Then it was all flatness. The Danubian plain. It was so wide, so open, the sky took up more of the world. The air lost the scent of pine and stone and just smelled of damp earth and distance. I held Anna and kept my back to the driver, facing south. I watched until the last dark line of the mountains dissolved into the haze. Then there was nothing to look at but the road ahead. We arrived in Seltzy near dusk. A village of low whitewashed houses, a single dirt street, fields stretching to the horizon. The soil was black. I remember that. A deep, rich black I had never seen before. It felt alien. A few locals stood by the party headquarters, watching our truck unload. They had been told to be welcoming. You could see the instructions stuck on their faces like a label. They didn't know what to do with us. The house they gave us had 2 rooms, a packed earth courtyard, a well with a cold iron taste. They showed us the door and left. We carried our things inside. It was so quiet. Not the deep sheltered quiet of the valley at night. This was a thin, exposed quiet. You could hear the wind moving across kilometers of empty field. We put Anna down on a blanket. Dejan walked to the window and looked out at that foreign darkness. He said, "This is where we are now." It wasn't a question. We had become a fact in a place we did not know. That first night I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds. A dog barking far away, the creak of the well rope in the wind, Anna's soft breathing. I thought about the arithmetic of it all. 1 piece of paper, 14 days, 800 kilometers, 2 rooms. It made a terrible, simple sense. They had removed us from the equation of our own lives. The question that kept me awake, the one that pulled at the edge of everything, was what do you build on soil that does not know you? What kind of life takes root in exile? We built a life in the wrong place. That is the only way I can describe those years in Seltzy and then in Dobrich. It was a life. It had weight. It had children in it. But it was always oriented toward a point 800 kilometers south. Dejan worked on the collective farm for 20 years. He would leave before dawn and come home with dirt ground into the lines of his hands. The land here was different. Flat, open, with a sky that went on forever. No mountains to hold you. No valley to cradle the sound. I waited 3 years before they let me teach. Every 6 months, I would go to the education office, and the man with the stamp would tell me my qualifications from Petrich were still under review. I think they were reviewing me. Our children were born into this northern soil. We raised them in a small apartment that never quite lost the smell of other people's lives. Every spring, like a ritual, Dejan would write the request. Permission to visit Koju. Every year, the refusal came back. A single line on an official form. Denied. Then, in 1965, permission for 3 days. And again in 1970, 3 days. Going back was like being a tourist in your own past. You arrive, and everything is familiar and wrong at the same time. My mother, so much smaller. The house felt different, as if it had been holding its breath. The tobacco fields were part of a collective now. The church was closed, its door nailed shut. And on the new maps, Koju was listed as a Macedonian settlement, We walked through it as visitors. We slept in my childhood room. And then we got back on the bus north. Those journeys back were harder than the original deportation in a way, because they showed you what had been taken not just from you but from the place itself. We made certain choices, quiet ones. We did not join the party. We did not denounce anyone, not even when it might have made things easier. We did not pretend to be Macedonian. We did not teach our children to be afraid of their own name. I say this not proudly. I say it as a fact. A list of things we did not do. Each one had a cost. A promotion Diane didn't get. A better apartment I was passed over for. A shadow that followed our children at school. I am still adding up that bill. Dejan grew quieter with every decade. In the evenings, he read history, Bulgarian history. He had to order the books through friends because the Dobrich library didn't have the ones he wanted. He taught our grandchildren Botev's poems, the same poems he quoted to me when we were young. He never said, not once in all those years, that refusing to sign that form had been a mistake. He died in the hospital in Dobrich in 1998. His bed was by the window. It faced south. I look at our children, at the life we built here in this flat northern light, and I wonder what it was for. Was it a victory? Or just a different kind of survival? We never surrendered the name, but we lost the place. And sometimes I think Dejan, in his silence, was always listening for a bell that couldn't travel that far. We watched it on the television in our apartment in Dobrich, the news. Todor Zhivkov had resigned. Dejan was beside me on the sofa. We were both in our 60s. The screen flickered with crowds and a man speaking at a podium, and for a long time neither of us said a word. The room was dark, just the blue light from the television on our faces. 40 years of knowing exactly what came next, and now nothing. No script. Dejan finally said, "Well," and I said yes. That was all. What else was there to say? The wall we had lived behind was made of paper and fear, and it had just dissolved in the air like smoke. We drove south in the spring of 1991, the first time we could go without permission, without that cold knot in the stomach at the militia checkpoint. The landscape unspooled outside the car window, just countryside now, not a forbidden zone. We arrived in the early afternoon. I parked the car on the road above the valley, where you can look down on the rooftops of Kozuhu. Dejan got out. He stood there, his back to me, his hands at his sides. I watched him from the driver's seat. He stood so still for so long. I understood then that you cannot return to a place you never left inside yourself. He had been carrying that view in his chest for 45 years. He was just setting it down. Then came the paperwork, the reckoning. The new state offered rehabilitation. We filed the documents, the petitions. We received a certificate. The Bulgarian state acknowledged in very careful language that the deportation had been unlawful. They offered compensation, a sum of money. I remember the figure, 2,000 leva. I held the check. It was just paper. There is no arithmetic for 40 years in the wrong place. No column for the jobs you were denied, the friends you never made, the silence that became your native language. You cannot add it up. The money was for the furniture we left behind, not for the life. My granddaughter asked me, this was in 2005. She was a clever girl studying history. She said, "Why didn't you just sign it, Grandma? It was only a piece of paper." She meant the form from 1948, the Macedonian classification. I didn't answer her right away. I sat with that question for 3 days. It followed me from room to room. Finally, I told her. I said, because your grandfather knew that the first thing they take is the name. And after the name, everything else is easier. The land is easier. The history is easier. The children are easier. He was holding the line at the name. I think she understood. I hope she did. But it's a different kind of understanding. For her, it's a story. For us, it was the weather. It was the air we breathed. Now, when I look back at all of it, the petition, the arrest, Belene, Dobrich, it feels like a series of rooms we walked through, one after the other, and the doors locked behind us. We're in a different room now, a quieter one, but I can still hear the echo of all those doors closing. I am the last one who was there. Dejan is gone. His mother is gone. My mother is gone. The men who signed the petition are gone. The militia man who put Dejan in the truck is gone. The party secretary who brought the form to our table is gone. I am the last one. And that means I am also the last one who can get it wrong. So I am trying to get it right. I have thought about that room in Petrich for 70 years. The one with the barred window. The man in the brown suit asking for names. I told him about Dejan. I told him about the petition. That was the truth. I did not tell him about my father's friend who printed the leaflets. I did not tell him about the teacher who hid them. I was 16. I was frightened. I have decided finally that I was protecting them. I told the truth about what I knew and said nothing about what I only suspected. I am not certain this is honorable, but it is what I did, and I am done apologizing for it to myself. You were right about the name, Dejan. You were right that the first thing they take is the name. They took it from the map. They took it from the school books. They tried to take it from our children. They did not succeed. Our grandchildren know they are Bulgarian. They know where Koju is. They have been there. They stood in the tobacco field where your father worked. That is not nothing. That is not nothing at all. We built a life in Dobrich. It was a real life. It was full of work and worry and 3 children and a small garden that never grew tomatoes as sweet as the ones in Koju. It was not the life we would have chosen, but it was the life we had, and we did not lie in it, not to each other, not to our children, not on the forms after a certain point. That had a cost. We paid it. I do not know if we were brave. I think bravery is something you see in other people later. From the inside, it just feels like being tired and continuing. I know that we did not lie. I know that I loved him. Through Belene, through the deportation, through 40 years of exile and old age and grief, I loved him, and the valley is still there. They took our home. They took our work. They took years from Dayan on that island. They did not return those things. You cannot return a year. You cannot return a home, because the home is not the stones and the roof. The home is the life you lived inside it, and that life is gone. They did not take everything. They did not take the smell of the tobacco leaves after the rain. They did not take the sound of the river. They did not take the memory of his hand on the small of my back, guiding me through a crowded room in 1945. They did not take the truth, though they bent it nearly to breaking. I am the last one. When I am gone, the memory becomes a story, and the story can be changed. A story can be softened, or made more dramatic, or turned into a lesson. I am trying here, at the end, to give you the weight of it, the specific weight. The weight of a deportation order on cheap paper. The weight of a child on your hip in a truck heading north. The weight of a man's head on your shoulder the night he finally cried for Belene. That is what I carried. That is what I am leaving. I suppose that is what I came here to say. The valley is still there. Our names are still there. And I loved him. That is the accounting. It is not a balanced ledger, but it is complete.